You would do well to remember, severing a vow, strongest of bonds, has consequences ever more dire.
After she is weakened by Haru, the sorcerers of the Academy of Haruya revolt. All of the Hikarian loyalists at the Academy are slaughtered in the town of destroyed. The soldiers of Rio Hikaria besiege Hikarian Manor, but are then massacred by defensive spells in turn. In this way, Radix broken boundaries in domino effect of destruction and suffering, and no one is ever hit once the love of life. She is sealed inside the rated Hikaria life. Permanent isolation, abandoned by everyone, she continues to lose her mind. She becomes trapped in an endless cycle of incarnation. Rebirth in insane loyalty is over and over. Stole away the rest of her children. The habits, or at least suspected. Why else would you leave this red wolf behind to protect her if you did not suspect some threat? But in the act of leaving the wolf behind, the writers are revealing something else about his character that he truly did care about her. And that's not all. He also gifted her a great rune, specifically the great rune of the unborn. This is actually kind of crazy. It is their great runes that give the demigods of the present their tremendous power. Each great rune is a fragment of the elven ring, a living relic with the potential to reshape reality itself. This was no poultry going away present. This was a source of power practically unheard of. Before the Shattering, the only rune bearers in the world were Malekith, who held the Rune of Death, and Queen Marika herself. Radigan essentially gave Renala the power of a god, so he must have cared for her, which makes it all the more surprising that he abandoned her. But we'll talk about that one a bit. There is a little bit of what Radigan became Elden Lord, the most powerful person herself. So, what is well, first of all, yes, not status, granting them positions of power and influence. I assume that Reinhardt would not be a Praetor or a command of Malmio, or that Radon would not have been able to found his army of Red Wings without their father's support. He may have abandoned his wife, but he did not abandon his children. Seems to have had at least four more demigod children with America, the cursed twins, Nikolai and Melania, and judging by his red hair, probably has a bit of Melana in as well. I don't know who else her father could have been, and we can assume he continued to be loving and supporting Mary. To see more of what he did in his position, we have to read some one-item descriptions, starting with the Golden Order Greatsword, which reads, Greatsword made of light, hollow, built in itself, forged by King Consort Radigan to proudly symbolize the tenets of the Golden Order. Telltale signs the trait that once the Greatsword was first one. Oh, the writer again. That'll be Radigan's Mosaic stuff. Source, but nothing. Instead of being a master of those sorcery and limitations, he is choosing to devote himself totally to the power and nurture for the golden order and nothing else. And that is why he erases any trace of responsibility from his hospital and middle with world during his life. However, going forward, it's much this personal vision is the only one to be allowed to stop it. It's just like fingers, parents, own children, but we'll get that later. It's the flipping spiritual sort of pattern, which the talisman pattern and forms combat built to honor the urge, practice and diet. In the names of the areas where combat took place, still throughout the lands between you can find massive coliseums. Apparently, in the time of God, literal combat used to be a common element in virtue worship. Not anymore. Not with Radigan, though. First of all, even though we revoke changes of the battle, Radigan stops her most sophisticated ruler and president. God breathes all to one step away from someone who is constantly seeking to son. Secondly, Radigan was introduced to the work. He ended the practice of ritual combat, closed down the Colosseums. He wasn't just trying to make himself perfect, he was trying to make the Golden Order perfect too. Again, this is not blind faith. This is not a character who is shackled by tradition and conservatism. This is a character who has his own personal vision of how the world should be, and is willing to do what has to be done to make that vision come true. So what other changes might he be responsible for? Well, Radigan seems to be closely connected to the rise of something called Golden Order fundamentalism, so that he was a practitioner of fundamentalism because he crafted the rings of meditation, which is a system fundamental spell. Golden Order fundamentalism, academic study of the Golden Order. This is in direct contrast to the blind worship that most citizens of the lands between them. It is an attempt to rationally or scientifically break the Golden Order down to its most fundamental parts. And we know what those fundamental parts were. The description of the law of regression incantation reasons. The fundamentalists describe the Golden Order through the powers of regression and causality. Regression is the pole of meaning, that all things yearn eternally to converge. Okay, so these are the two fundamental elements of the Golden Order, regression and causality. Causality is easy to understand. It is the law of cause and effect, of action and reaction. When you take action A, it causes action B to occur, which in turn leads to reaction C, and then D, and on into infinity. Regression is far more obscure. What does it mean for all things to yearn to converge? This reminds me of the Dread from Dark Souls 3, where at the end of that game's timeline, the entire world of Dark Souls has been converged together into a single chaotic jumble. And it also reminds me of the Lord of Frenzied Flame ending, in which the flame melts the whole world down, burns everything which distinguishes and divines, until the lands between which the primordial and uniform to its state, where life can no longer exist. According to these reasons, once upon a time, every universe was once connected with a single common summoner, the One Great, which was later fractured, creating the conditions in which life as we know it can arise. And according to the law of life, it seems that everything else was to return to the One Great, to return to uniformity and oneness. The Golden Order is the exact opposite of the law of regression. The Golden Order divides society into a distinct hierarchy governed by rules and laws. The Golden Order keeps things separate from it. It prevents the law of regression from altering the course. Perhaps one of the duties or goals of Golden Order fundamentalism is to resist this convergence, to keep the world divided so that life may continue to thrive. Maybe this revelation is why Radigan has chosen to cast aside a study of sorcery and devote himself totally to the Golden Order. Maybe he believes he is defending the state of the universe itself. Maybe he believes he's the only one who can. But we're veering pretty heavily into speculation here. That regression also suggests a possible explanation for why Radigan...
A skąd ty wiedział, jak tu wyciągła?
Bo zawsze sprawdzam swoim.
Aha, ty tak to może kury?
Tak.
Bo ja się ubrałam na gość. No dobra.
They were attracted to each other like polar opposite magnets. If this is true, then perhaps Radigan did not choose to take control of their shared body at all. Maybe it is just the result of a natural process. But let's move on. Next, let's look at the Scar and Sword Seal talismans. There are 4 of these, 2 each for America and Radigan, which are nearly identical. They are all in the shape of eyes, similar to the seal America placed on Mesmer. America's is golden, while Radigan's is red. Hers displays a rune shaped similarly to an arc, and his displays the lattice rune structure seen on both his statues and the original seal. Hers improves magical abilities, while his improves physical abilities, lending further evidence to my earlier theory that he is the physically stronger half, the warrior half. This might also explain why he studies sorceries and incantations. In order to become more perfect or complete, he wants to make your advantages his own. Anyway, now let's actually read his item description and see what it reveals about his character. These seals represent the lifelong duties of those chosen by the gods, and then solemn duty waits upon the one beholden, not unlike a gnawing curse from which there is no deliverance. Both of these talismans increase your character's power while also increasing the damage taken, which symbolizes the way America's own power was cursed. A suggestion here. Some sort of pleasant, like a gnawing curse. Maybe holding the element inside your very flesh, this living relic of incredible power with the ability to reshape reality. Maybe it sucks. Maybe it hurts. Maybe America is in actual pain all the time. Or maybe it's something more abstract, more psychological. The general stress and responsibility of leadership, of constantly having to make high pressure decisions, which will always hurt someone, of never being good enough, where the stakes are so high that any mistake can have terrible consequences for tens of thousands of lives, especially in this tyrannical Golden Order, where America has to do things like imprison her own children and students because they were born the wrong race, or banish another child to the Shadowlands because he happened to be born cursed. Those decisions must have affected her emotionally. Maybe wielding power itself is a curse. After all, Saint Trina would rather kill Nicola, her beloved other half, rather than allow him to become a god, which she describes as a prison. As I theorized in my video on America, I think she wanted to give up, that she wanted to die. But I don't think that Radigan agreed. I think he wanted to remain loyal to the Golden Order, to this cursed duty, even if it caused him personal misery, which it probably did. As we have seen, Radigan seems to have genuinely cared about his children. It must have been miserable for him to see the painful, debilitating curses that Nicola, Melania, and Mesmer were all born with. Even with all the obvious suffering it caused, he still believed in the Golden Order, or at least that it was the best possible path forward. Finding the given time of the one hope that crumbling down the beloved Golden Order was already fracturing. Let's take another look at Radigan's Rings of Life. Canteen with with no gratitude from his father Radigan. Yet, the young Nicola had repented fundamentals, for it could do nothing to treat Melania as a cursed rock. This was the beginning of unalloyed gold. Nicola's abandonment of the Golden Order seems to have predated the Shattering, to have coincided with the creation of this spell, which means that Radigan's opponent's son had turned his back on him, was already trying to replace the Golden Order with unalloyed gold, and the already gone with him, and she was spreading it, transformative but another undone progress, spreading new life to the new order, even if she was not that part were already plotting to overthrow the great Limb. Mo had already discovered the formless mother. Meanwhile, the two fingers were already selected and for replacement for the America, the Imperials, two gods to rule over a new age, which means that Radigan wanted to replace too. He was going to lose everything. And in the distance, over the horizon, lay the constant threat of the Tarnished, a banished heathen army that America had sworn to call home someday, to wage war in the lands between, to create chaos, to seize the Elven Ring. And worst of all was America, his other half. Once upon a time, together they had forged the Golden Order, but now she was plotting and scheming behind his back, threatening to destroy everything he had fought for, the very thing he had abandoned his own beloved wife for, throwing it all away. It must have felt as if everyone was betraying him, his own family, his wife, his children, even the emissaries of his god. I think this is when Radigan made a dramatic decision which would forever change the fate of the lands between. He chose to take control, to become a god, to become the god. And why shouldn't he? It was Radigan who was always trying to better himself, who strove to become more and more complete. It was Radigan who was called a hero, a champion of the battlefield. His children were the healthy and strong ones. He was not cursed the way America was. He had the strength, the will, the vision to be better than her, or at least that's what he believed. I do not think that his decision was motivated by a villainous or selfish desire for more power, but instead I think he really believed he was doing the right thing. With the power of God in his hands, with him kept out of the way, he could become the ruler that the lands between needed. But it was never to be. Seeing what was about to happen, America destroyed the Elven Ring, and in doing so, not only destroyed the world they had built, but destroyed them both, shattered their shared body. Radigan would never be a god, would never be complete. Which brings us to the fourth and final phase of his story, present day. What is Radigan doing now, and why? After the destruction of the Elden Ring and the disappearance of both America and Radigan inside the Earth Tree, a power vacuum was created. The lands between were thrown into a civil war, the shattering. Nearly every single demigod went into open revolt. The kingdom was torn apart by betrayal and bloodshed, with the terrible damage his own body had received. Radigan was no longer strong enough to do anything about it. He could no longer force his will upon others, but he still did not give up. He influenced events in the only way left to him. Sealed the Earth Tree. We know it was him because the seal is in the same latest structure that we see on his statues and on his scar seal. He would never allow any of those traitorous or cursed demigods, none of his unfaithful, undeserving children or stepchildren, inside to seize what was left of the Elven Ring's power, and none of those lowly heathen tarnished either. By sealing the Earth Tree, he prevented any more damage from being done, prevented any more disastrous changes from being made. And it's worth noting that Radigan has gone totally rogue here. He is no longer serving the greater will. He is no longer following the guidance of the two fingers. He is serving himself in his own personal vision of what the Golden Order should be. In my video on America, I discussed how the key theme of Elden Ring's story is power. It's about who wields power and what they do with it. Well, Radigan uses the last of power to hold the lands between in a permanent stasis, a permanent stalemate, where no one can ever achieve their goals, not even himself. This is what makes him a villain. His refusal to relinquish control even after he lost. His refusal to allow the torch to be passed on, to allow anyone else to inherit his position, no matter who they are or what they want. If Radigan got his way, the lands between would remain broken forever, never being given a chance to heal or transform. In this way, he is similar to Gwyn, the Lord of Sunlight and Tinder from God's Gwyn was another character refused to allow the world to live in its course. He wanted to keep the world stuck in the stasis of the age of fire forever. And so, in the end, it was destroyed. Sometimes a villain is not defined by what they do, but by what they won't do. Because refusing to make any choice at all can be just as disastrous as making the wrong choice. Radigan could have opened the Erdtree to a worthy successor. Why not let Morgoth inside, who, by all accounts, was just as loyal to the Golden Order as Radigan himself? But Radigan is stubborn, maybe even a bit egomaniacal. He fights to the bitter last breath, and so it is inevitable that he would be destroyed, because change, just like death, is always inevitable. That is where my examination of Radigan's character ends. But I still have a lot more I want to say about America. I realized as I was editing that last video that there are a ton of topics related to America that I barely touched on there. So next time I'm going to post a final cleanup video where I will discuss everything about America's character that I didn't get a chance to last time. What really happened at the Gate of Divinity, her relationship with the Horns, the shamans, the Two Fingers, with Godfrey, every mystery in her story that remains unsolved.
Następnym wraz rozwojowej Życie Zmęstnienie 2020. Kupię już teraz na stronie Eminent.
There is a kind of horror deep at the core of God with a Golden story that I find fascinating, because I've never seen anything quite like it before. She's already long dead by the start of the game, so we have to piece the story together through fragments and small scraps of information. The story that we uncover parallels the story of the Golden Order itself, from its glorious rise to its violent collapse. And then, just like the Golden Order, even after death, he continues to live on in a sort of monstrous, corrupted half-life that is even more horrific than if he had just died outright in the first place. And depending on the choices made by the player, again, the Golden Order can be transformed, reborn in a strange new form. This is something that I'm not sure very many players realize. I don't see people talk about it very often, but you can actually bring God with the Golden back to life. We can witness the moment of his rebirth in the game. However, or like is so alien and so strange that it's not surprising that most players won't recognize it as life at all at first glance. But that is all part of the horror of Godwin's story. He is forced to undergo multiple dramatic and hideous transformations against his will, becoming more and more inhuman with each change. So what I'm going to piece his story together from beginning to end to explore this horror at the center of his character. Godwin's story is closely tied to the story of the Golden Order at every stage. His story begins with its parents, his mother, Mary, Colonel, either seized, stole, or were planted, the incredible power that she has with God. Alongside her husband, God is probably the greatest warrior to have ever lived in this setting. They and their armies conquered the entire land between, established a new dynasty and a new age, the Golden Order, bathed in the shining golden blessings of newly born Erdtree, an age where death was sealed away, so America and her children could live forever. America and Godwin had three children. The twins, Morgoth and Poe, were born twisted bodies of Omen, and so were banished underneath the royal capital. But Godwin, as far as we know, was born perfect. Worth noting, some fans have theorized otherwise, that, like his brothers, he was also born with a mutated body, and I will discuss that possibility later in the video. But for now, for the sake of this story, we're going to assume that he was born with a normal body. It's very likely first slappable celebrated. Historically, the births of healthy royal children were often viewed as a promise of future stability and continuing prosperity. The birth of Godwin would have solidified the golden order of the lands between, would have signaled to the people that this rule, this new way of life, was here to stay. We are only given a few scraps of Godwin's story, but we can infer some things about his upbringing. He would have grown up in what would have never been would have been a teacher, he would have been trained by the greatest warriors, management, brothers,
Kurwa.
essentially have been and God's parental attention. Other characters in the circumstances might have been arrogant or spoiled, but God was future experts suggest otherwise. Instead, he wrote into someone who was open, sympathetic, and or friendships in unexpected places. But after a while, cracks would begin to appear in Godwin's apparently perfect life, just at the same time as the first cracks began to appear in the Golden Order. It all begins with a mysterious controversy. At some point, his father, for reasons that are still not clear, was stripped of grace and driven out of the lands between. Afterwards, his mother unexpectedly quickly remarried, gaining a husband, Radigan. Radigan brought with him 3 children, and together with America, they had 2 children. A far cry symbolizes that he's very wrong with the Golden Wars. For Godwin, this would have been a dramatic change in circumstances. He went from being essentially an only child with 6 adults on children, from being unique and singular to his one man. We do not know how Godwin responded to these changes in his life, whether he mourned the loss of his father, whether he was bothered by the sudden appearance of so many rivals for his mother's attention, or his relationship with his stepfather. But the description of the Golden Epitaph suggests that he at least had a positive relationship with his younger half-brother Nicola. Based on his later exploits, I suspect that Godwin would have done his best to welcome all his new siblings into the family, though his cousin Ronnie will eventually murder him, so maybe it wasn't all sunshine and roses. When he reached adulthood, Godwin presumably had children. So, in the present day, Godwin grafted is a distant member of something called the Golden Lineage, which traces itself back to Godwin, first husband, America. And since Godwin son of Godfrey, well, that lineage must technically end as well. We do not know how those about those children. But just praise God I suspect that none of Godwin's children were as impressive as good. Now, they could not was either of the war, or even himself. There are also suggestions that America was the most caring of mothers. Throughout our journey in the lands between, our traveling partner Melanie, possibly another sibling of Godwin, but uncertain. Well, she is able to pass on echoes of America's past proclamations. In one of these advents, let's listen to them together now.
Jesteś jedynym widzem w tym momencie, Sandra. Nigdy.
To allow her to live on
Ale wszystko z tego co widzę działa przez restreama.
So neither fully died. Looking at the eye of this very blasphemous plot, it appears that another member of his extended family, Reinhardt, was also in on the plot. And there is also the fact that the assassins had close ties to his own mother. But it's hard to know what to make of that. Could America really have been involved in the murder of her own son? From that little snippet of dialogue we heard earlier, she did not seem all that upset by the idea of her children being forsaken or sacrificed. Would she be willing to let daughter be sacrificed? Much greater indifference of Ronnie, but we get that. Either way, it's a broad conspiracy involving multiple members of the family. Terrible betrayal. Let's try to look at it from Godwin's perspective. It probably would have been a normal night at the cabin.
Że...
Something off here and there, or maybe you never noticed.
Co, kurwa, konkurencji nie masz, co?
Like I said, the shock, the terror of that moment. Remember, Godwin is a warrior and a great diplomat. He would have fought back. It would have been a brutal and bloody battle. But he was caught by surprise and hopelessly outnumbered. At some point, he must have realized that he was going to die, and he never knew why. He never knew who these assassins were or who had sent them. But they did not just kill him. It was crucial to the plan that his body live on in death so that the curse mark could be divided in half. The whole point of the plan was to let Ronnie dispose of her own body, and thus dispose of the influence of the two fingers, so she could continue the rebellion in spirit form. So they captured him, holding him down, and viciously carved half the magical symbol into his body. This half of the curse mark allows his flesh to live on in death, despite the destruction of his soul. Soon after his death, Queen Marika shatters the Elden Ring and disappears along with Raditz. There is no ruler of the lands between anymore. A civil war erupts. The kingdom is corrupted and destroyed. In this way, the death of Godwin is really the death of the Golden Order. Except, just like him, it does not die a true death. The Golden Order stumbles forward in a zombie-like state, in perpetual stalemate. Each of the demigods lost or broken, incapable of becoming the next ruler. So what happens when your soul dies but your body lives on? Well, his body transforms into this nightmarish, inhuman monstrosity. His flesh becomes horrific, and strangest of all, something called death grows out of his flesh. This twisted black light spreads to every corner of the lands between, and wherever it goes, its touch brings corpses back to life. A plague of the dead consumes the entire kingdom. They are known as those who live in death, and are hunted by Golden Order fundamentalists, like D for supposedly corrupting the Order. Visual design of the Death Root reminds me of the design of the Bed of Chaos back in the first Dark Souls. The Bed of Chaos was also portrayed as this twisted, malignant plant growing out of control. In both cases, I think the twisted plant structure is meant to represent this idea of nature going wild, chaotic, not being governed or controlled by the ordinary natural laws. Back in Dark Souls, it was meant to literally represent chaos. In Elden Ring, it seems to represent the cycle of life and death itself, going out of control, no longer working the way it's supposed to. When form in this shape and head. There are two possibilities. The first is that his body was transformed after death, a thematic representation of this idea of nature and the cycle of life and death going out of control. The second possibility is that his body was that is at some point. There are no images of what Gotham looked like before his death anywhere in the lands between. And the only image in-game, the one in the opening cinematic, does not show either his head or his legs. There is, however, a single image of him outside of the game, in the story trailer, which does portray him as having a normal human head, but also does not show his legs. I think it fits his story better if he was born human and his body was corrupted and mutated at the same time as the Golden Order was. But I thought it was worth mentioning that there are alternative theories. Anyway, Godwin's story is not over yet. As I said at the beginning of the video, just as the Golden Order can be born in a new form at the end of the game, so can he. This is Fia, one of the 5 legendary Tarnished mentioned by name in the opening cinematic. Each of these Tarnished holds the power to transform the land between to bring about that stand for purpose to relate with multiple absorb their energy, then to mold the corpse that exalted noble to transform the champions into his cold body, and thus grant second chance at life. And that was either tool that's been open, laying the decimated skeleton and dwarfs, surrounded by the skulls of the dead. When she arrives in the lands between, she chooses to lay with the corpse of Godwin to bring him back to life in a bid to end those on the way. I assume she was going to bring his corpse back to life. So who knows how many centuries after his death, Godwin would sit and wake up to his own transform. We'll talk about it in a what? And that is how this is bad. But that is it. He does the life, but not what else happened. Let's listen. The self is one. In this dialogue, she explicitly says, Godwin's new life is going to stir inside of her, and that new life is going to take the form of this room. So, how is this possible? What exactly? Well, from the description of the Elden Ring, we know that the Elden Ring is the beast. Is it the legend? It's alive, sentient, and conscious, capable of defending in a group while alive, or some of them. And this room is Mandy, Death Prince. This is his soul, life, soul, within his body, along with the person. This is not the old one. And there are 3 total. In each of them is intended to both repair and transform. The Golden Order. With this fact, transformers live and dead in your mind and then kill the brand, making it a central aspect of the new order. As a result, the way the cycle of life and death functions will be for a chance. In this way, Godwin's life has consequences for technically transformed. But exactly what part of him exists within the consciousness, his memories, experiences, his personality? Is he aware? Does he have the capacity for thoughts and feelings of his life? Will he feel sorrow for what has happened in his family, his home? Or will he be subsumed larger business of the open? Until the day when the Elden Ring is again broken and transformed. Whatever the is a form of life totally different and an alien to our own. It is such a bizarre form of life that it is hard to make any sense out of it at all. As I've stated multiple times, Goblin's Golden story is the story of the Golden Order. When it begins, it is glorious and honorable and perfect, but hiding darkness and fracture lines underneath. Later, it becomes broken, twisted, and corrupted and horrific. But then, with the coming of the tarnished, it has a chance to be reborn into a new form, a second life, very different from the first. Its true essence is strong, anything circumspect, artificial, necessary, full of consequences we cannot fully understand. The last video I will post before the release of Shadow of the Earth Trip. It's actually probably going to be posted the same day. I will be quiet for a couple weeks while I play through the new expansion. The next time I post, it will be to examine whatever new characters and stories we discover in Nicola's Land of Shadow. So, see you on the other side.
Good sir, this was supposed to be going on here. A door up. Stranger things happen at sea, or so I'm told. But I suppose my
Last week I posted a very long video on why this is very will, but in that analysis I may have made a huge mistake. My entire analysis was based on the assumption that the greater will is a sentient, intelligent life form of incredible power, capable of independent decision-making with its own personal motivations and biases. And not only that, but I also assumed that it cares about what is happening in the lands between. It cares about what form the Golden Order takes. It directly influences the course of events here. But what if all of that is wrong? What if the Greater Will does not care about what form order takes? Just so long as order is present and consistent. And even stranger, what if the Greater Will is nothing more than the divine essence of order? Still incredibly powerful, but mindless and formless. What if it is actually a kind of fundamental force or energy spread throughout the universe, giving structure and form to matter, but not choosing what shape that form takes? Sort of like gravity. It is everywhere. It affects every aspect of our lives. But it's not alive. It does not make decisions. It is not capable of formulating plans. I mean, anything. In that video, I also assumed that the Great Will must have had a hand in crafting the Golden Order that currently dominates the lands between, and therefore it would at least be partially responsible for any abuses inflicted on the population by the Golden Order from the one disregard. So what if I was wrong? What if the Golden Order is entirely America without any intervention by any higher power? What if she was the one who planned the war? Personally responsible for what was stuff this setting, partly for as the true antagonist of the story. This also when she shattered the Elden Ring and thus broke the Golden Order. She was not heroically breaking a tyrannical outer god's stranglehold on her kingdom, but was instead more like a child, petulantly breaking her own toy to prevent anyone else from being able to play with it. When I posted that video, there were a ton of comments that made really compelling arguments that my understanding of the Greater Will and its relationship to the Golden Order was mistaken, and I thought it was a really fascinating discussion and I wanted to explore it further. So the purpose of this video is to take a second and deeper look into the topic, to gather all of the textual evidence I can find that directly describes the Greater Will, to have a serious discussion about how it is being portrayed, and to figure out whether the writers want us to believe the Greater Will is a sentient, intelligent being, or whether they intended it to just be the essence of order, mindless and uncaring, or some sort of complicated combination of the two. In this video, we are going to examine 8 pieces of textual evidence, and I've ordered them from least to most important. First, dialogue. First, second, technology. Third, fourth, America. Fifth, descriptions, stars, fiction items, seven, itself, and I believe we know more technical evidence or understanding of the order, dialogue, all evidence can start with functional dialogue. there is a lot of deception here. But if we do try, with this dialogue, it's brilliant. Once upon a time, a secret. This was when people collected together in something called and then for reasons which are not influenced the one great that quite arose. For example, responsible for fracturing the one great, or perhaps the great of the one great forms. Either way, during this process, the movement was playing a great and supposedly this was all suffering or and I'm not told what this mistake was, but yes, I was thinking that the mistake was bringing order and structure to the first place to allow what arise. As it was. This suffering will be was like the emerge. I find the dialogue posts with landscape. You're getting we always deliver up an explanation or the person will of the beginning of life. It is so you're given so what difference the creative world must be more than something but we would figure that something great and perhaps taking something perhaps it's temporary force something but we're getting unfortunately this dialogue is not it's a really dark question about the creative world because the darkness noise that the world let's move on. So that this is burned they would use it to the it's someone with dedicated life to the greater building serve. At one point, the greater will. So let's listen to that together now.
The greater will is my voice. I will reduce it to burn all. The character's time of this world, and you will fall to my blade. We refuse to become your pawns. Consider this fair warning.
I find this dialogue to be really interesting. This guy is speaking to the greater will as if it can hear and understand him, as if it will care what he is saying, and craziest of all, he believes that he can hunt down and kill the greater will with his blade. Now, if we believe and assume that he's not just insane or mistaken, then the greater will must have some material living form that can be harmed by physical weapons. Of course, he might just crazy or he might have no idea what greater will actually is. For now, it's not an objective or expert source of information on the topic. In this dialogue, he never actually says anything about the true nature of the greater will, or what its motivations are, or whether it has any motivations at all. Still have not found any answers to our questions, so let's move on to the third piece of evidence, the opening cinematic. The opening cinematic does mention the greater will by name, but we're not going to watch it together because the narrator in this cutscene just speaks way too slowly, and I don't want to waste your time, so I'll just read it to you. This is what he says. The great Elden Ring was shattered. In our home, across the fog, the lands between. Now, America the Eternal is nowhere to be found. And in the night of the Black Knives, God with the Golden was first to perish. Soon America's offspring, demigods all, claimed the shards.
Wow.
Strength triggered a war from which no lord arose. A war leading to abandonment by the greater will. In my previous video, I assumed that abandonment implied intelligence. Like, if you're abandoning something, that means you are choosing to abandon it. And if you're making a choice, you must be intelligent. But maybe not. Some commenters made a compelling argument that, and I did mention this possibility in the video too, if the true nature of the greater will is the essence of order, then it would probably be naturally repelled by disorder and chaos. The shattering was an extremely chaotic civil war, which could have led greater wills to wither away, not by choice, but just by natural processes. Whenever order is restored, then the greater will also presumably be restored too, because it exists wherever order exists. I had also assumed that the line in the opening cinematic meant that the greater will had abandoned the entire limits between multiple.
Jesteś na streamie?
This video suggested that
Sandra.
the demigods, meaning that the two fingers were correct when they said that the greater will had not abandoned the realm, and also that the two fingers may have been correct in their belief that the greater will wanted to be tarnished to become the next Elden Lord. In that case, the real reason he initially failed to enter the Erd Tree is not because the greater will locked the door before leaving, but because the tree had been sealed by someone else, someone who is defying the greater will's commands for their own personal reasons. A lot of people in the comments suggested that this person is Radigan, since the pattern on the Erd Tree seal matches the pattern on the statues. Maybe he does not want his position of Elden Lord to be taken by anyone else.
A, okej. Rozpisałem sobie jazdy dzisiaj.
But we're getting into the text will be just decision to abandon the demigods or the link between or whatever. Or maybe it was naturally repelled by the chaos of the shattering. We still don't have any answers, so we have to move on to the fourth piece of evidence, the punishment of Queen America. Alright, at one point the player can ask Enya about the current status of Queen America, and this is how she and the two fingers respond.
But after the ultimate shattering, she was imprisoned in the old tree, a grim punishment for shattering the old, despite my God. Speak. My cousin has demanded a heavy sentence. She remains a god and prisoners.
Nie pamiętam imienia. Jakiś Artur.
For her crime of shattering the elements, but it does not say who actually punished her. When we finally enter the Erd Tree, we find America impaled by a spear, strung up by a rune, and sealed away. Remember, she is a god and extremely powerful, so whoever did this to her must be even stronger than her. In my previous video, I assumed that she had been punished by the greater will, and if it's doling out punishment for rule breaking, intelligent and care about what's going on in the land between, right? Except maybe not. Let's assume that I was wrong and that someone else was responsible for doing this to her. Is there any other possible candidate, someone with both the power and motivation to cripple Queen America? Well, yes, actually there is. The Elden Beast. Remember, the Elden Beast was the form of the Elden Ring. When America tried to shatter the Elden Ring, in doing so, she was also attacking the Elden Beast. Maybe it retaliated, defended itself. Maybe it defeated her in battle and then struck her up from that rune as punishment, sealed her inside the Erd Tree as its own personal captive. The only problem here is Radigan, who seems to have taken control of America's body, definitely trying to repair the Elden Ring. But maybe he just got caught up in the Elden Beast's wrath. So, once again, this piece of evidence is conclusive. The greater will may not have anything to do with America's current captivity, where her answer, which brings us to our tip.
Oj, Sandra. Ty i twoja pamięć.
Sky, in eternal anticipation of their liege, of the coming age of the stars and their war at night. This one is much more definitive. It does not say they invoked the iron.
Wróciłem się, kurwa.
They invoked the ire of the greater will, in that they are in ire in the neutral sense of the word. This means that the greater will is an emotional being. It gets upset when people plot against it. That's exactly what the gods were doing. Slayer Blake. weapon with the power to harm it and its envoys. This implies that the greater will does care what the people of the lands between are doing. I mean, at bare minimum, they care enough to get angry with the Nox. This description does not say who actually did the damage. America, Fingers, or someone else operating on the greater will's behalf. I think this, while small and not entirely conclusive, was compelling evidence for that. But there is still more evidence to examine. Next, let's take a look at the item description of the Elden Star's incantation. It reads, "It is said that long ago the Greater Will sent a golden star bearing angels into the lands between, who later become the Elden Ring." In my previous video, I assumed that this also implied intelligence. Like, if it is sending golden stars shooting across the universe, it must be just choice to do so. But I saw some comments on the previous video stating otherwise. They argue that the people of the lands between themselves do not understand the greater will. They think that they were a god, mistakenly ascribing them to influence or desires, not realizing that, in truth, the greater will does not care about them or their lives. They argue that the greater will did not consciously send the Elden Beast to the lands between. Instead, the Elden Beast arrived in the lands between as a natural consequence of the fundamental cause and effect structure of the universe, for which the greater will, as the divine essence of order, is ultimately responsible for but not actively manipulating. It would be sort of like if we worshipped and prayed to gravity every time an asteroid struck the Earth. Sure, gravity is technically responsible for that asteroid going, but it did not what to set the asteroid field, because gravity is capable of making conscious choices. It is not alive. It would be silly or ignorant to use an asteroid field as evidence of gravity's intelligence or mainstream greater will itself. That a lot of that this form of storytelling, item description, is a form of third-person omniscient narration. Remember your English class when your teacher taught you about different points of view from which a story can be told. Stories always have narrators can be first person, second person, or third person. The narrator can be omniscient, meaning it knows absolutely everything that is happening in the story, and even what is happening inside the characters' heads. Or it can be limited, meaning that the narrator's knowledge is the narrator's more subjective. The character in the story or exactly outside of the story. Or what their lives. So what kind of narrator do we find in these item descriptions? The speaker or narrator of these little snippets is unnamed and undefined, but appears to be nearly omniscient. Seems to know everything that has ever happened. However, the speaker often uses uncertain language, saying things like, "It is said that blah blah blah," or "according to legend, blah blah blah." The speaker is either unwilling or unable to tell us exactly what is true and what is false. It means that the audience can never be certain what is actually going on. We are always basing our understanding of the story on rumors and legends. Sure, it is said that long ago the greater will is sent a golden star, but who is saying what is the plan and what is their we are left adrift in a sea of uncertainties, but without any other alternatives. We have no choice but to cling to what little information is presented by this narrator, no matter how potentially unreliable, because otherwise we would have no solid ground to plant our feet on. My point is that when I'm analyzing the story of Elden Ring, I am choosing to trust this narrator, to assume that whatever they're saying is the factual, objective truth. When the narrator says, "The greater will became irate with the Nox, the greater will sent the Elden Beast to the land," according to my analysis, the assumption that this is true, and that the words mean what they appear to mean. But this is not a misinterpretation or mistake by the people of this fictional world, because otherwise we are lost. And for that reason, I find this item description to be compelling textual evidence that the greater will is a being capable of making choices, capable of sending the stars across the cosmos, and choosing their destinations, meaning that it is an intelligent and conscious being. Of course, other players are free to treat the narration and the item descriptions with more suspicion or more open interpretations, and if you do that, you are going to come to very different conclusions. But let's move on to the next piece of evidence. Okay, so the Elden Remembrance description explicitly states that the Elden Beast is the living incarnation of order, and the Elden Beast is definitely alive. It appears to be intelligent. It is at least smart enough to kick my fat ass up and down the street at 7,000 steps in a row. Since playing it, it lost more trouble than this track constantly runs away to the other side of the state now every single time I get close to it. But anyway, what this means is that concepts like order can have living incarnations in this setting. When you look at the example of a stell, it appears that stars can have physical living forms too. Maybe the greater will is a star. Even if the greater will is nothing more than the divine essence of order, though, it could still have a physical living form. It could still have magical powers, thoughts, and emotions, biases, and motivations. It could make its own choices. The fact that the Elden Beast exists at all is proof of that possibility. Maybe is a creation of the greater will, or a child of the greater will, or a piece of the greater will, broken off and sent flying across the cosmos. But once again, we're getting off the topic. To end this video, let's examine the eighth and final piece of evidence, and also what I consider to be the most compelling piece of evidence in the game, the dialogue of the two fingers. There is nothing in this game that makes me more certain that there is something sentient, but that it cares about what's going on. It's been rotting those fingers, plates, envoys of the greater will. They claim souls of the greater will, communicating to wishes and commands. They claim to commute with the greater will. They even ascribe no emotions to the greater will. And once they actually say that the greater will is pleased with us, I just cannot find any way to fit their dialogue with theories that the greater will is either not sentient or just does not care about what's going on in the lands between. For that to be true, the two fingers would have to either be insane, like nonsense, or they would have to be liars, manipulators, deceiving everyone, using their supposed connection to the greater will to craft a world of their own selfish desire. And while that would be a really fascinating story, I just cannot find any textual evidence to back it up. If the greater will was not intelligent, it could not communicate with or command the two fingers. And if it did not care, it would not
Właśnie, no. Chuju.
believe in found answers to our questions. Yes, the writers want us to think that greater will is and it might even have a physical form. Yes, the writers want us to believe about what is happening between that it's just emotions or more. I know the writers not portray it as just self-esteem matters without it work. But there's still one question left. What's the greater what's the difference? Argument of the goal. All of their things roll up. We have a the two fingers make a direct connection to the greater will and the golden order. They say that the
Co tak w ogóle grasz? Monster Huntera?
will send the Elden Ring to the lands between. Without the Elden Ring, there is no golden order, and without the greater will, there is no Elden Ring. Which means that America or Radigan or whoever did not have the golden order entirely on their own. They needed the power of greater will to do it.
Co to kurwa jest?
since the previous video used the existence of the mending rooms as
Z drugiej
evidence
strony
that
ładne.
Grendel does not care what form one takes in
A,
just so long as that works. Because there are three mending rooms and
to górne.
the purpose of these rooms is to both repair and alter the Elden Ring, transform it with new ideas, and thus transform the Golden Order too. And those transformations can be really dramatic. They create totally different societies to the one America ruled over, such as an age where absolutely everyone is cursed, or an age where the gods have no power. It is significant that these mending rooms are compatible with the Elden Ring, despite not being original to it, and not even originating with the Greater Will, but instead with random tarnishing in the lands between.
Czyli na Discorda dzisiaj nie wbijasz.
That it has already been changed in the past. For example, the image of the Elden Ring we see in Cumberland for Missoula clearly contains roads that do not exist in its current form, and Radigan's latest structure seems to be missing. As multiple commenters pointed out, it seems very possible that Greater Will was involved in the previous ages, that it also had interactions with the dragons and beasts that long before America's age. It seems as if the Greater Will crafted the Elden Ring with flexibility in mind, that it is intended to be modular and changeable, that whoever became its vessel or Elden Lord could have a significant amount of choice in how they used it, that each vessel and Elden Lord was allowed to reorganize society according to their own personal ideals and principles. If that is true, then maybe America and Radigan are far more responsible for the tyrannical nature of the Golden Order than I gave them credit for in my last video. Maybe the Greater Will gave them the tools to create any order they wanted, and they chose to build a world full of blood warfare, subjugation, persecution, and slavery. And the Greater Will is a neutral party, though I assume that the Two Fingers would have been involved with the whole project, and that the Greater Will would have been communicating with the Two Fingers, expressing displeasure if America or Radigan created an order it disapproved of. So maybe we cannot absolve it of all blame quite yet. Either way, that is all the potential evidence concerning the Greater Will's true nature I found in the game. If I missed something, please let me know. And I probably did, because Elden Ring is such a game with so much hidden information, it's practically impossible to keep track of everything. As I stated in my previous video, I do still think that its true nature is probably the divine essence of order. But in the setting of this game, where even stars can have physical forms, I do not think that contradicts the possibility that it is also a living creature with a physical body and its own personal motivations. Every single time I post a new video, the comment section immediately fills up with a bunch of smart people who confront me with ideas and evidence I misunderstood or maybe never even considered at all. It always makes me feel like the videos are sort of incomplete or not as good as I wanted them, which is exactly how I felt about that Greater Will video after reading through the comment section. That I made a bunch of stupid mistakes, which is why I hope this addendum video covers at least some of the gaps in that previous video. That this time I provided ample textual evidence to support my interpretation of the story, and that I have given the topic of the Greater Will's true nature as thorough a scrutiny as it deserves.
I smell it. Death feeding me. Touched. Bring, I shall grant thee. Eye and claw. Feed me.
With the release of the Shadow of the Herb Tree expansion, the story of Elden Ring is done. Barring the possibility of a sequel, we now have all the information about Queen America that we are probably ever going to have. And while the DLC did answer some questions, it left just as many unanswered, and also raised several new ones. So the purpose of this video is to do a quick rundown of all the things we still don't know about Queen America. I've broken it into 10 questions. First, why did she shatter the Elden Ring? Second, what is Radigan? Third, what happened to her at the Gate of Divinity? Fourth, what was was her involvement in the Night of the Black Knives? Or did she have any involvement at all? Fifth, what is her connection to the guidance of grace, and what can that connection reveal about her goals? Sixth, what is the nature of her relationship with the two fingers? Seventh, and this is related to that last one, what is America's connection to the greater will? Eighth, in the Shadow of the Earth Tree expansion, it is revealed that America was born in a village of shamans. But what does this actually reveal about her character? Ninth, what was the nature of her relationship with the Hornset? And finally, 10th, what about her relationship with Godfrey, the first Elden Lord? Okay, so let's start at the start with perhaps the greatest Elden Ring mystery of them all. Why did Queen Marika shatter the Elden Ring? Actually, I think we do have some pretty solid answers to this one, and I discussed those answers in detail in the first video I posted analyzing the character. To summarize, I believe there are two possibilities here. I think that for complicated reasons, she wanted to die, but being immortal was unable to do so through normal means. Or alternatively, she simply refused to cede control over Radigan. Either way, destroying the Elden Ring was just one part of a much larger and very convoluted plan that includes the tarnished warriors, strengthening those warriors through struggle in the face of death outside the lands between, and then calling them back to wage war against the demigods, equipping them with a weapon powerful enough to kill a god, unlocking the Rune of Death, and burning the Earth Tree, which allowed one tarnished warrior to face Radigan in battle, destroying him and maybe finally destroying Marika too, depending on which ending followed. But if you want to hear a more detailed discussion of that topic, you can watch my previous video. Our second question is, what is Radigan? Okay, so I did post a whole video where I examined Radigan's character, how his character is developed by the writers, what his personality is, what his motivations are. Radigan is a character who seeks perfection, order, and control both within and without. He seeks to perfect both himself and the world around him, and he is apparently convinced that the Golden Order is the best means of accomplishing that. But that does not answer the question of, what the hell is he, and where did he come from? Has Radigan always been a part of Marika before she was a god all the way back to her birth? Or did he emerge later on? And if so, why and how? Have they always shared a body, or did they ever exist in separate bodies? If they once existed separately, how and why did they merge? Is this a case of multiple personality disorder, or is he merely an aspect of her personality somehow given independence and self-life? Or is he an entirely separate and independent person existing inside of her body? There are really no definitive answers to any of these questions in the game, though there are some clues to be found in the relationship between Mikola and his other self, Saint Trina. As far as I can tell, Mikola and Saint Trina have always existed alongside each other. She did not just show up one day. She is not a product of the Hornset's bizarre jar of flesh melting
Kurwa.
descendants to God. She's separate character. They totally separate personality, motivations, and abilities. For example, Mikola does not possess her power over sleep. That is hers alone. And most interestingly, she is able to exist entirely independent of him, at least for a time. In the present, she exists in a separate body, far from Mikola's current location, though she is slowly fading away, her lilies wilting and changing colors, the nature of her sleep getting deeper and deeper. And I assume this is because she has been cut off from the big body. The longer she is separated, the weaker she becomes, eventually leading to death. Assuming that Radigan is the same sort of being as Saint Trina, then he is his own independent character with his own independent goals, existing inside Marika's body alongside her personality. And he has always been there. There is no explanation for this. It just is. And I guess we just have to accept that. Moving on, our third question was, what happened to Marika at the Gate of Divinity? Well, once again, I have already posted an entire video discussing this topic, but I'll summarize my ideas here. I think Merida ascended to godhood by crafting an artifact of tremendous strength at the threshold of the gate. She did this through a ritual involving mass sacrifice, slaughter, and death. The artifact she birthed was a new great rune, one of incredible power, and by wielding it, she became the most powerful character in this setting.
Mój współlokator z Holandii do mnie teraz napisał. Kilka miesięcy temu wymieniał telewizor. Wysłał stary z powrotem, czy gdzieś, i ten i teraz dostał wiadomość od firmy, która go zabrała, czy od jakiegoś magazynu, że ten telewizor zaginął i że jest w którymś z ich depozytów i że kurwa, że albo musi zapłacić jego wartość za to, że jest w tym depozycie, albo miesięcznie 35 euro. Gdzie nie wiedzą, gdzie jest ten telewizor. Pierdoleni, kurwa. Ja pominę fakt, że ten telewizor ten telewizor coś z 2000 euro dał, ale...
Description of this armor set, I based my analysis on the assumption that the assassins were working with her
Tak, nie chuj.
participated in, or at least acquiesced to the murder of her own son. But now,
Kurwa,
I don't know if there's enough technical evidence to really support that conclusion. In fact, there is very little information about the Black Knife assassins to be found in the game at all, and their allegiances are difficult to understand. They definitely helped Ronnie during the Night of the Black Knives, but after the player completes her quest line, they apparently kill Iji, her war counselor, and attack Blythe too. And their ringleader, Electo, is held captive in an ever jail atop the Moonlight Molten Plateau, a location controlled by the Carians. So their relationship with Ronnie is more complicated than it at first seems. They are not her allies, at least not anymore. In the present, several assassins can be found wandering around various random catacombs. Another group is protecting the path to Nicholas Alig Tree, and another is protecting America's bedchamber. So there's very little consistency in their current activities. They don't seem to be supporting any single faction. Their loyalties are all over the place. One of the only hints as to their true identities and allegiances is this: the description of their armor, which states, the assassins that carried out the deeds of the Night of the Black Knives were all women, and rumored to be Newman, who had close ties with America herself. Now, some people have claimed that this is a mistranslation, that the English translation overstates their ties with America, and the connection is much more obscure in the original Japanese. Regardless, America is a Newman. The Newman's rune description states this pretty explicitly. The only characters in the entire game who are identical.
jeszcze najlepsze to jest, że dostał wiadomość, że trafiło na konkretny magazyn do tego. I nie chcą mu tego kurwa nawet uznać. No pojebane kurwa.
Son, that the assassin share some large goal, but then what did that goal mean? But there is another much less exciting possibility. Maybe the writers were just trying to explain why these assassins were powerful enough to defeat Godwin in the first place. Like, why are you, a mortal evil, genetic? Why are these assassins so tough? Well, because they are members of the same magical special race as American. After re-examining textual evidence, the simplest explanation is that the Black Knight assassins are probably not working with America, that she had no involvement in the death of her son, and that the assassins are a separate faction with their own separate goals, independent of either America or Ronnie. Their racial connection to America is nothing more than that. They are characters with a shared ancestry, but who otherwise don't know each other and don't care about each other. There is one more hint in the game that might explain their true allegiance, and this is a piece of evidence I ignored in previous videos. In his dialogue, the spellblade Roger describes the assassins as scions of the Eternal City. And if that is true, and there's no reason to suspect that it isn't, the assassins must actually be members of the Nox, enemies of the Greater Will, who wish to establish their own Age of the Stars, ruled by a mysterious Dark Lord to replace the Golden Order's Elven Lord. These assassins only briefly allied with Ronnie to further that goal, but have since returned to being independent. So let's move on to our fifth question. What is Marika's connection to the guidance of grace? And what might that connection reveal about her goals? In my original video, analyzing Marika's character, I stated that I believe that she is personally in control of these golden rays, which guide our character through the lands between. And I do still believe that is probably true, because the guidance leads us to accomplish Marika's goals, to become powerful by acquiring each of the great runes, to burn down the Erd Tree, to slay Radigan. Why else would the guidance lead us to do these things? Who else stands to benefit from these actions? Something interesting about this guidance is that most Tarnished can no longer see it. In fact, our player characters will struggle something of a rare for being able to do so. It seems that when a Tarnished either fails or refuses to seek out the Great Runes, their guidance is taken away from them. This makes perfect sense if Marika is the one in control. She is not going to waste her time offering guidance to anyone who isn't going to follow that guidance or to lead with failures. She needs someone strong enough and determined enough to slay God. Something else interesting is that the guidance of grace appears differently to different characters. You only ever see one example of it. In the cutscene before the battle with Godfrey, we can see that he too is being guided by grace, and his is pointing him directly towards our player character. If Marika is in control of the guidance, this also makes sense. I don't think she cares
co jest, kurwa?
who breaks into the Erd Tree, just so long as it's
A, ja sam kurwa blokowałem kwestię, dobra.
If it's the player character, whatever, that works too. She purposely guides us and Godfrey to fight each other to ensure that only the strongest tarnish the one who greatest.
Jeszcze 2 dni i będzie kurwa nowy content.
But what else? Let's take a look at the map and see where the grace actually leads us. It traces obvious paths to Stormveil
Nie mogę się kurwa doczekać.
Each of these destinations makes sense. Each of them are locations where great runes can be found, or in the case of Castle Soul, an item necessary to reach a great rune. Marika wants the Tarnished to seize great runes in order to become powerful enough to defeat Radigan, and it's not all that surprising that she is willing to sacrifice all of her children to
W sensie tego, do Monster Huntera, tego, Mizutsune i masa innych, i parę innych rzeczy. Potwory też mają zrobić trudniejsze.
directs the player south towards Castle Morn. It also directs us through the Swamp of Aeonia into the Church of the Plague, where Millicent can be found. In the Realm of Shadow, it directs us towards the Gate of Divinity and Nicola. And finally, and perhaps most significantly, it leads us to the Carian Manor. Okay, so if Marika is in control of the guidance of this, why would she lead us to these locations? Does she want us to put down the Misbegot Rebellion at Castle Morn, or is she simply pointing us in the direction of a powerful early foe, an opportunity to grow stronger? Does she want us to help Millicent, or does she just hope that Millicent will lead us to Malenia's location? After all, at the start of the game, Malenia is missing. and it's very possible that even America does not know her location. But Millicent will be naturally drawn towards the genital, leading us towards Nicola is the least mysterious to me. I assume that his age of kindness is not compatible with Mary's goals, and she would want us to stop him. It's worth noting that the only demigod that Grace does not direct us towards is the Lord of Blood, which makes sense since America does not know his location either. And finally, why is she sending us to the Carrigan Manor? Does she want us to aid Ronnie the Witch? Is it possible that she wishes for Ronnie's Age of the Stars to come into being? That she wants her daughter/stepdaughter to slay the Greater Will? I do think it is significant that America is only completely destroyed in two of the endings. The first is in the Lord of the Frenzied Flame ending, where what's left of her body is burned away along with everything else. Though her guidance does not lead us down to the Three Fingers, so I don't think she wants that ending. The second is in the Age of the Stars ending, in which Ronnie dissolves America's fractured corpse into golden dust. If America's true goal is to finally die, Ronnie is one of the only characters who can actually accomplish that. However, this is hardly definitive. It is just as possible that America directs us to the Carrigan Manor with the expectation that we will defeat Ronnie and her followers in battle, just like all of the other demigods. Okay, so as I was editing this video, I noticed something very important that I had missed. So I am inserting it here. After you deliver the Finger Slayer blade to Ronnie and she embarks on her journey, something interesting happens. A new sight of Grace appears in her chambers along with new guidance. This ray of light shows the player where Ronnie went, allowing us to continue her quest line. If America really is in control of the guidance of Grace, then this is confirmation that she does want the Tarnished to protect her. And what the book didn't mean, and it does. With this confirmed, it brings up a whole someday, the world will be like but they are very willing to kill that way. Seems like the Americans candidates to replace her? Why would they do that? Who would they what's going on? We know absolutely that's her guidance. If she can hold this let's get it. We're going to get staff from the what is going to want to relate? What is going to be? The greater will. What is she suspecting? They probably gave her Malekith in the same way they gave blind to Ron. Otherwise, their relationship. That leads us to our next question. What is America's relationship with all of her father and mothers? And what about well, church talks about the elder incredible. rise to power. Is the vessel of the ring. He holds the power of the power. Organize the world. About the source of that power. Does she the greater will that you wish to do its way? Does she even know what the greater will is or what it wants? Does she care? She does explicitly delve into the mysteries of the golden water. Did that mean delving? Which of her interesting with her faith in the world? Now, it's in the story. The Mr. Gill might stated that because those mysteries not matter to the story, they are tell. It's good. The witness other powerful expected what they are. Bond square question, which is, in the shadow of the earth creates that character was born in a village of shamans, that she was probably a shaman herself. But what does this actually reveal about her character? What, if anything, are the writers trying to communicate to us here? Well, in the Japanese version of the game, the word used to describe these shamans is which is often translated as life. The term though comes with a full role historical term that she would have had spiritual world. She would have been very knowledgeable and experienced in the realms of ritual, magic, and prophecy. Mentions that as a young girl, Erica was talented spirit. Erica was 18 did want to become the best of those other characters in the lanes between. And it might also explain why Ron the remembrance of the rock gods explicitly states that the reason why Nifla and Olivia are inheritors is because they were children of a single god, and so naturally inherited a great deal of power. But Ronnie has a more or less normal human mother, so why was she also selected as an inheritor? Well, Snowwitch Grove, she was mentored by the Snowwitch, which is sort of training spirits and magic. The world of this sort of training was Exactly what was compared to what was the machine say that it's very tough. That was not shown. It's magic God. Right? This flesh was melded with that planet. Then it is there is a distinct if the single jar rejoins it's a global thing. Give us moments it would too. But if you were not a choice, what did she say? It's all stepped into the future. But that's your speculation. There is no more technical evidence to see this fact. Visual differences between these factors, those found in those suggest that God, Lucifer, instead of the God of the fir tree, the golden order. But again, there's too little textual evidence to say anything certain. So there's the on and final topic of the video, which is all about God. What is God? What is God? Battle against the Father. Sees that way for himself. The leader is interacting with its active too. What sort of take this? But it's very basically a instead of all this is what the works.
Get out of there!
It's no just as a means to an end and powerful warrior to have at her side, care about her needs just as a chance to face ever more powerful opponents in battle. What does Godfrey actually want? Does he care about becoming Elden Lord? He does want. What? This is just another one of those gaps in the story for such a remote character that is so little. It's there their direction. Yet, if you still don't know, you probably don't know. Because those books have books. Silent Hill 2 is one of my favorite games of all time, and it's getting me. And I really want to be good, but even if it's not, I'm going to do some things to widen the story characters anyway, because I adore Silent Hill story characters. When I finish with Silent Hill 2, we'll return to one of 3 videos, so see you. Spencer the Impaler is initially portrayed as a very stereotypical villain. He was the leader of an extremely violent religious crusade, a genocidal murderer. His enemies alive. He did just sell it to attempt
Ty chuju, gdzie spierdoliłeś?
everyone and everything that's in the world. Its title, The Impaler, is an allusion to the historical lasting tailor. Ruler who was notorious for his cruelty and talent that served as an inspiration for Bram Stoker's Dracula. Impalement is a particular horrific method of torture and execution, in which the human body is penetrated by a stake, often in such a way as to not kill them.
Dobra.
There are records of people living for days after being impaled.